Okay, let's hope this works. Hi, my name's Emily Giorgi, and I'm going to be discussing clinical prediction rules. So first, we read an article written by Adams entitled Clinical Prediction Rules, and he defined a clinical prediction rule from here on out, known as a CPR, as mathematical tools that are intended to guide clinicians in their everyday decision making, just to make life a little easier, because clinicians have a pretty chaotic and hectic and challenging life on a day-to-day basis as it is, so CPRs are just one way to help with that. So first, this article discussed the 4 requirements that a clinical prediction rule needs to have in order for it to be valid. It needs to be developed through an observational study. It needs to have validation by being tested on more than one population than the original study came from. It needs to have impact analysis, right here, which measures how useful it actually is in a clinical setting, and that it's not simply a good rule on paper, but that in real life it works properly and efficiently too. And finally, implementation. It needs to be accepted, and people need to have adopted it and started using it. The article then goes on to discuss the 5 different ways in which these prediction models can be developed. The first one is through a scoring system, where basically variables are given points, and then there's a cumulative score added up, and basically the higher the score, the greater the risk factor of a person developing something occurring. The second one, based on a multivariate analysis, as you can see here. I realize I'm pointing to the screen with my finger and you can't see my finger. So number 2 is a prediction model based on a multivariate analysis. So it's basically the same as a scoring system, except it's a little more refined, it's a little more simple, because it only uses independent variables, as well as it shows odd ratios, which is the likelihood of something happening in any given situation. The third type is a nomogram, which is basically a way of calculating formulas for a specific situation and giving an outcome. It's really simple to use, but with simplicity can also lead to failure, because it's so simple. It can't really modify itself for more complex situations. The fourth one, artificial neural networks, are inspired by the neural system in the body, so it takes an input, processes it, and then decides whether or not a reaction is warranted. The disadvantage is that if it takes in too much information, it could decrease the accuracy because too much stuff is getting jumbled. And finally, decision trees are basically flowcharts. The downside of that is that those little bubbles, a lot of people have seen flowcharts, and there's usually only 1 or 2 words within each little bubble. So that could lead to a lot of interpretation, and it could be interpreted the wrong way. Oh, before I get into my next article, I just want to discuss really quickly that CPRs can be really beneficial to athletic training, because it helps set a universal way of diagnosing a patient or an athlete. So it's a lot more time effective and more efficient, I think. But it's just important to remember that clinical prediction rules, while they're there to help make things easier and to categorize people, athletic training isn't a field of black and white. There's a lot of gray area, and every athlete's a little bit different. So it's important that as athletic trainers are implementing CPRs, it's just important to take it with a grain of salt and to realize that it's not set in stone. It's not the 10 Commandments. There are exceptions to every situation. But I think it's also a really good starting point when trying to come up with a solution, whatever the situation may be, whether it's dealing with an injury and an athlete or a patient, whether it's like dealing with conflict resolution between coworkers or a budget issue, anything. So next I'm going to be discussing an article that I found on my own, and it's called The Development and Validation of a Clinical Prediction Rule for Severe Community-Acquired Pneumonia. So basically, in this article, they considered severe community-acquired pneumonia, also known as SCAP, from here on out. It focused on patients admitted into the intensive care unit, where initial signs were commonly overlooked because they didn't look that ill initially. So, community-acquired pneumonia worsens to SCAP, severe community-acquired pneumonia, if it's untreated. So the purpose of this study, as it shows right here, was a way to develop a CPR to implement it into the emergency department, that's what ED stands for, to prevent the worsening of community-acquired pneumonia into severe community-acquired pneumonia. Sorry, I know it's a mouthful. They defined ways of them categorizing something as SCAP was hospital mortality, mechanical ventilation, and septic shock. So basically, it took a lot of info of everyone coming in and out of this hospital into the emergency department, and the article spewed out a lot of numbers, but basically it came down to this table. They found 8 independent predictive severe community-acquired pneumonia factors, and those are these factors right here. So blood pressure, it's arterial pH being less than 7.3, respiratory rate, all of this stuff. And what's great about this CPR is that it's relatively simple because there are only 8 factors that they're really looking at. It's also important to note that while it's not on here and that it's not 9 independent factors, the correlation of living in a nursing home with severe community-acquired pneumonia too was also something that they almost considered and that they almost put in here. So so they said that when looking at patients to keep this in mind as well. So from here, a score was given to each patient based on their predictive value. Here are their values that you can see in this table. It's either like the criteria is major or minor, and the points range. Sorry, I realize I should be pointing here, not on my screen. And here are the points. The cutoff score for a patient, though, is 10. Because they've decided that it showed the best balance between sensitivity and specificity, as I'll talk about a little bit later, which I'll talk about right here. So up at the top is the severe community-acquired pneumonia prediction rule that this study came up with, and they compared it to other clinical prediction rules, so you can actually see its comparison towards previous CPRs. You can see that it had a 92% sensitivity, which is very good, and its specificity was 73.8, and its specificity was the ability to identify a larger population, of patients at a lower risk. So that was important, and this is why the cutoff was 10, because they felt that it was the best balance between sensitivity and specificity, making sure that it's altered for each person, as well as making sure to hit a large population. And yeah, at the end here, you can see basically the flow chart. So they really, I think this falls under a decision tree type of CPR. So you can see the 2 major, sorry, I'm going back here. In its criteria, you can see the 2 major areas versus the minor areas into the 8 different categories. And then if more than 2 are present here, there's probably a great chance of getting severe community-acquired pneumonia, whereas if here in these major categories, if more than 1 is present, or more than or equal to 1 is present, then that could lead to SCAP. And then from here, it is up to the hospital to determine if they need intermediate care or ICU. So I thought this was a really nice, simple CPR to understand. Being as though I'm not very good with numbers, I was able to follow this article pretty easily, and I thought it was really interesting. I liked that they compared it to other previous CPRs to see how they could better it instead of just settling for something, which I really liked. And here are my references. The first one right here is the article that I did a quick synopsis of initially in this PowerPoint, and then the second one, if my mouse will work, the second one, if you want to go check it out, is the development and validation of a clinical prediction rule for severe community-acquired pneumonia. And that's it for my clinical prediction rule. Oh, I think this is still recording. Oh man.